He had been there so long, it was like he'd become part of the building, just another silent fixture in the far back corner of the shelter. No one noticed Ranger anymore. Not really. Not the families that passed by, not the children who squealed at puppies, not the volunteers who came and went. To them, he was just the old dog, still, quiet, fading. Day after day, he lay curled on the same thin blanket. His food bowl remained untouched more often than not, and when people walked past his kennel, he didn't lift his head, not because he was asleep, but because somewhere along the way, he'd learned that hope only hurts when it keeps getting ignored. Ranger was a German shepherd, once proud and powerful. There had been a time when he stood tall, ears alert, eyes bright, every movement purposeful. That time was long gone. Now his fur was patchy, dulled by time and stress. His joints ached too much to stand for long, and his eyes, those once sharp amber eyes, had dimmed into something softer, sadder. He didn't bark anymore, didn't pace, didn't beg. He had stopped trying. No one ever came for the old ones, and he knew it. He knew it in the way his body sagged with each breath. He knew it in the quiet way he waited. For nothing at all. Chloe Myers hadn't planned to visit the shelter that day. In fact, she hadn't planned to visit any day. Life had become about quiet routines. Early mornings at her sketch desk, coffee gone cold beside watercolors she never quite finished, and afternoons spent folding laundry in silence while her 7-year-old daughter chattered about everything and nothing. Sophie had been asking for a dog for months. Not whining, not demanding, just asking, the way kids do when they believe the world might still say yes. With scribbled drawings taped to the fridge, with handwritten notes on sticky paper. He can sleep in my room. I'll feed him every day, I promise. Chloe had always smiled softly and replied with a kind but practiced, "Maybe someday, sweetheart." But someday never came. Not since Daniel passed. Not since the house grew quieter than it should ever be. That morning, Sophie had asked again, eyes bright, ponytail slightly crooked from doing it herself. "Can we just go look, Mama, please? We don't have to bring anyone home." Maybe it was the way she said it, or maybe it was something deeper, something in Chloe that wanted to believe in small things again. She sighed, put down her coffee, and grabbed her keys. As they pulled into the gravel parking lot of the shelter, Chloe glanced toward the faded red building with its chain-link fences and peeling paint. "We're just looking," she said aloud, more to herself than to Sophie. Sophie nodded quickly, smile wide, fingers wrapped tightly around her mother's hand. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She was already hoping. The moment Chloe and Sophie stepped through the shelter doors, the noise hit them like a wave. Barking, whining, the high-pitched yelps of puppies bouncing against kennel doors. The air smelled of bleach and dog food and something faintly metallic, like old fear and forgotten time. Sophie's eyes lit up instantly. She moved from kennel to kennel, giggling as a Labrador mix spun in circles, chasing its own tail, waving at a pair of husky pups tumbling over each other in play. Chloe trailed behind, hands stuffed into her coat pockets, offering the occasional smile. She wasn't cold. But something in her had gone quiet a long time ago, and this place, for all its energy, didn't warm it. "Look at this one," Sophie called, crouching to coo at a spotted puppy that pressed its nose to the glass. Chloe nodded, murmured something polite. They kept walking, each kennel louder than the last. Some dogs barked so hard their front paws left the floor. Others whimpered softly, tails wagging like a question. And then, without warning, Sophie stopped. She stood in front of a kennel tucked into the back corner, where the light from the window barely reached. Her brow furrowed. "Why isn't he barking?" she asked, her voice small. Chloe stepped up beside her and peered in. There, lying in the shadows, was Ranger. Still, silent. His head rested on his front paws, eyes half open, unmoving. The noise of the shelter seemed to fade, because in a room full of dogs desperate to be seen, this one wasn't trying anymore. And somehow, that said more than all the barking ever could. Sophie pressed her hands to the bars, her small fingers wrapping gently around the cold metal. She leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Why does he look so sad, Mama?" she whispered. Chloe knelt beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair from Sophie's cheek. Ranger still hadn't moved. He lay curled tightly in the far corner of the kennel, his body thin, almost folded in on itself. His coat looked dull from time and wear, and his eyes, they were open but distant, like they were tired of trying. Before Chloe could respond, a quiet voice spoke from behind. "That's Ranger." They turned to see a shelter worker standing nearby, mid-40s, clipboard tucked under one arm, the look of someone who's seen this kind of heartbreak more than once. "He's been here for over a year," she said softly. "His owner passed away. No one else in the family wanted him." Sophie looked up, frowning. "So they just left him?" The woman nodded, her voice quiet. "We posted about him, shared his story online, but most people are looking for younger dogs, ones that run and jump and play. Ranger doesn't really do that anymore." Chloe looked back inside the kennel. He hadn't moved an inch. His food bowl sat full and untouched. The blanket beneath him was too thin for the cold floor. Something caught in her chest. Not pity exactly, but recognition. There was a quiet ache in the way Ranger lay so still, as if moving wasn't worth the effort anymore. "He doesn't even look up," Sophie whispered. "He used to," the worker said. "When he first got here, he'd sit up every time someone passed by, wag his tail, waited by the gate." She paused. But no one ever stopped, and eventually, he stopped too. Sophie lowered herself to the floor just outside the kennel. She didn't say anything more, but she didn't look away. Sophie didn't speak. She simply sat there, cross-legged on the cold concrete floor, her small hands resting in her lap. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't trying to get his attention. She was just there. Ranger's eyes shifted, barely, just enough to show he noticed her. He didn't lift his head, didn't move his ears, but his gaze, dull and cautious, slowly met hers. Sophie leaned forward a little, not too close, and whispered, "I see you." Chloe stood behind her daughter, silent, watching the strange stillness between them. There was no barking now, no wagging tails, just a little girl and an old dog, one sitting still with patience, the other lying still with pain. "Can I try?" Sophie asked quietly, her eyes not leaving Ranger. Chloe crouched down. "Try what?" Sophie extended her hand slowly through the bars, palm down, fingers loose and gentle. "I just want him to know someone sees him," she said. Chloe hesitated. "Sweetheart, he might not come over." "I know," Sophie replied. "He doesn't have to." Seconds passed. Long, slow seconds where nothing happened at all. And then, something tiny, almost invisible. Ranger's nose twitched. Not much, but enough. A soft sniff of air, a shift in his breathing, a faint stirring in his chest. He didn't get up, didn't crawl closer, but he acknowledged her presence. And in that small, quiet moment, Chloe felt something stir inside her. Not pity, not sadness. Something warmer, like the soft ache of a door slowly beginning to open. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had truly seen him, and he had seen her back. Chloe stayed crouched beside Sophie, her eyes still fixed on the unmoving figure behind the bars. "I'd like to meet him," she said quietly. The shelter worker blinked. "You mean outside the kennel?" Chloe nodded slowly. "Just for a few minutes." Marla hesitated. "He hasn't gone outside in weeks. We try, but he usually won't even stand up." Sophie looked at her mom, then back at Ranger. Her voice was gentle. "We can try anyway. Maybe today's different." With a soft sigh, Marla reached for her keys. They waited as she slowly unlocked the kennel door and stepped inside with practiced care. Ranger didn't move, not a flinch. His eyes followed her, but his body remained curled, motionless. The leash slipped easily around his neck, still no resistance. it was like he didn't feel it at all. Chloe and Sophie waited just outside, saying nothing. The air felt still, tense but not afraid, more like holding its breath. "Come on, boy," Marla said gently. Nothing. Then Chloe stepped forward. She crouched low at the gate, her voice soft as a hush. "It's okay, Ranger. We're not rushing you." Sophie stood beside her, whispering with a smile. "You can go slow. We're right here." Something shifted, not much, but enough. Ranger's ears twitched slightly. His body gave the smallest tremble. Not fear, but recognition. The kind that happens when words don't just reach your ears, but sink deep into your chest. It was as if, for a moment, those voices, soft, sincere, steady, cracked through the heavy wall he had built around himself. One trembling leg moved beneath him. Another. He pushed up with a shaky effort. His frame wobbled as he stood. One step, then another, and then he stopped. That was all. Just 2 steps. But for a dog who had forgotten how to hope, 2 steps were a miracle. Ranger stood at the edge of the kennel, barely past the threshold, legs trembling beneath his weight. He didn't move forward, but he didn't step back either. It was like he was caught between 2 worlds, one that had forgotten him, and one he wasn't sure he was allowed to hope for. Chloe knelt slowly, her knees touching the cold floor, eyes level with his. Up close, she could see just how much time had passed for him, the gray along his muzzle, the way his ribs pressed gently against his thin frame. His eyes, so clouded and tired, flicked from her face to Sophie's, and then back again. Chloe didn't say anything at first. Words felt too small in a moment like this. But something inside her stirred, that old ache, the one that crept in after Daniel died, the quiet weight of being seen by everyone, yet still feeling invisible. She knew that feeling. She was looking at it now, curled into the shape of a dog who had nothing left to give. "He's been trying to survive," Chloe said, more to herself than anyone else. "But no one's given him a reason to try living again." Marla stood nearby, arms loosely crossed, her expression softening. "Senior dogs are tough," she said gently. "They take time, patience, and sometimes they never really come back." Chloe looked down at Ranger again. He still hadn't moved. And yet, he had stood, he had listened. Maybe that was enough. "Maybe they don't have to bounce back," Chloe murmured. "Maybe they just need a soft place to land." There was a long pause. Then Chloe rose to her feet, her hand still holding the leash, loose and calm. "I want to take him home," she said. Sophie gasped quietly. "Really?" Chloe smiled at her daughter, then looked back at Ranger. "He's not invisible," she said softly. "Not to us." Marla blinked, caught off guard. Her lips parted, as if to respond, but no words came at first. Then a small, stunned smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. She looked at Chloe, then at Sophie. "Thank you for seeing him." The paperwork was surprisingly short. A signature, a few initialed forms, and then, just like that, Ranger no longer belonged to the shelter. He belonged to them. The walk to the car was slow. His steps were unsure, every joint stiff with time and memory. But Chloe and Sophie didn't rush him. They walked at his pace, together. The afternoon sun had started to dip lower in the sky by the time they reached the driveway of their small home. In the back seat, Ranger lay curled on an old quilt Chloe had pulled from a storage bin that morning. It smelled like cedar and dust, but also like safety. He hadn't moved the entire ride, he hadn't whimpered, he hadn't looked around. He just lay there, eyes half open, breathing slow, like someone unsure whether he was allowed to exhale yet. Chloe kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. Each time, her heart clenched a little more. He looked so fragile, not broken, but worn down in the way only time and loneliness could wear someone. Sophie sat beside him, legs tucked under her, her small hand resting lightly on his back. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Chloe got out first, then opened the back door. She crouched down and whispered, "We're home, Ranger." He lifted his head, just slightly. His ears twitched. He didn't jump. He didn't bolt, but he looked. And that, somehow, was more than enough. Chloe stepped back to give Ranger space. He hesitated at the edge of the open car door, eyes blinking slowly at the unfamiliar world in front of him. No barking, no concrete floors, no metal bars, just a quiet yard wrapped in golden sunlight, a small porch with a bowl of water waiting, and a house that smelled of warm wood and something soft. Something safe. He sniffed the air, cautiously, then took a step forward. Sophie watched from just inside the doorway, hands clasped together at her chest. "Come on, Ranger," she whispered. "This is your home now." Ranger walked slowly, his movements unsure but steady. He didn't look around frantically. He didn't bolt for a corner. Instead, he moved through the front door like he was walking into a memory he had almost forgotten how to want. Inside, the house was quiet. A soft dog bed sat by the fireplace. Next to it, a blanket Sophie had laid out earlier, covered in cartoon paw prints, and her favorite stuffed animal waiting beside it. Ranger didn't go to the bed. Not yet. He walked past it, past the water bowl, past the toys, until he reached Chloe. And then, without a sound, he gently lowered his head and rested it against her leg. Chloe froze, breath catching in her throat. Then, slowly, carefully, she lowered herself to the floor and placed a hand on his back. "You're safe now, Ranger," she whispered. Behind her, Sophie knelt beside them and wrapped her arms around his side. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He let them in. That night, he curled up by the fireplace, and though his tail only wagged once, slow and quiet, it was enough. Because the dog who had once been forgotten had finally been found.